So friends, in the first part of the discussion, we reached a point where a view of that was emerging in the 18th century society in England would confine itself to the middle class, to the educated middle class, to people who had time to spend in the coffee house, sit there, relax, and talk about one another, and things becoming a bit narrow in scope because the English essay would just capture the mood of the time, which is quarrelsome, which is irritable, which is laughable, which is witty, and all those things. So, and English essay is prospering at that point of time. The second thing that I would like to know from Professor Payal Nagpal herself is how does then the English essay contribute, even if in a small measure, to the rise of the English novel, which also appears around 1730 or so. 1740, I believe, Joseph Andrews is published, and that is as vocal and as voluble as the essays that you talk. So these are the points that I'm sure you would be touching, and something specific about Steele that you shared partially in the first part. So what exactly the kind of values you stood for, what you wanted to promote? At one point you said in the beginning that he was also, or somebody in his company was talking about religion, talking about a kind of importance we should give to, and you also brought in Protestantism. So all these things combined so fascinatingly in the essay. So something about that.
Yes. So when we talk about the way in which the English essay shapes the English novel, so I think we are looking at a lot of transitions from news. In fact, there is a critic who's actually done a full empirical study of all the issues of the Tatler, and more than 100 in more than 100 issues, news is very central to it. So which means that precise information about current events, about what's happening in society, and when we use the word society, it is like you said, the urban society. It is society as it is shaping in the city. It is a society that is shaping in the hands of certain people who are writers here, who are also, let's say, associated with the government, but are contributing to the field of culture very meaningfully. So when we move to the English novel, I think this recognition of literature and its relationship with society, apart from, of course, the prose form that is used in both cases, I think that is integral. So if there is something called the novel that is to be written, what is it that the novel is going to showcase? So I mean, we have to keep in mind the epistolary form of the novel, that emerges.
It is directly connected
with the essay. So what is it that is being, if a letter is being written, what is being conveyed? And what is being conveyed, really speaking, are glimpses of the society that the person who's writing, and of course with a motive, with a perspective, is writing to another person. So this view of writing as having a role to perform in society and of being related in a sense to, as I said, the field of culture is very important, and the precursor of all this is the English essay. So these essays, as they appear in the periodicals, like 3 times a week in this case, is very, very significant. And what are the values? So of course, he begins by talking about truth, innocence, honor, virtue, and so of course there are limitations, and there are things that are important, topics that are taken up, and yet at the same time we notice that, I mean, if we talk about manners, he talks about, he uses the word manners. So this is the time, when 18th century is also going to be, we see the comedy of manners, and we in theatre we are seeing all these things happen at the time. So he uses what he calls a mask, and this mask is that of Isaac Bickerstaff. So as mentioned earlier, like of 271, about 188 were written entirely by Steele, and Addison wrote only about 42 here, and jointly I think there were about 36, and Swift contributed to about a dozen. So, when we see this empirical study that is conducted by Greenough, we see that more than 100 issues have news as very, very important, as primary, and of course other aspects are there. And post that towards, after the first 100, 150 or so, other issues become important, and social issues that are taken up. And this actually moves us, it's almost as if the stage is set now for something like The Spectator to happen, or for the English essay to influence, in a sense, the literary form influencing the making of the genre of the novel. So we see coffee house, we see middle class, we see the conversation, we see discussion, and we see the whole idea of writing itself. This is what comes together in the English essay, in the periodical, in the 18th century, to create a very vibrant culture of dialogue, of not just learning but of dialogue. And there is at times a lot of archival information that is conveyed, and one can head towards really speaking the Tatler for this. So for instance, he says, the state of conversation and business in the town, having been long perplexed with pretenders in both kinds, in order to open men's eyes against such abuses, it appeared no unprofitable undertaking to publish a paper which should observe upon the manners of the pleasurable as well as the busy part of mankind. So people who have the leisure and people who are busy need to read this, so that they can be warned of the pretenders in both kinds. So to make this generally read, it seemed the most proper method to form it by way of a letter of intelligence, consisting of such parts as might gratify the curiosity of persons of all conditions and of each sex. So there were, as it's already stated, that there should be something in each of these issues, really speaking, for the fair sex, and primarily, of course, the whole idea of virtue was being propagated through it. So the general purpose of this paper then is to expose the false arts of life and to pull off the disguise of cunning, vanity and affectation. And we know that when we talk about the 18th century, affectation is something that was constantly taken up and attacked. So what is to be recommended is a kind of general simplicity in our dress, our discourse and our behavior. It's interesting that there is Steele and then there is Isaac Bickerstaff, which means that we cannot take all these lines also at face value, and there is always the context behind the immediate context that is put forward in the essay. So he says, Steele says in the preface, no man has a better judgment for discovery or a nobler spirit for the contempt of such impostures. So there is a sense of, and then he says, which qualities render you the most proper patron for the author of these essays. So there is the use of the word essay very clearly here. And so the essays, they begin with, whatever men do is the medley of our book. So that's it's given in Latin, but the translation roughly is, whatever men do is the medley of our book. And so which means that all kinds of social happenings and relationships, everything is, in a sense, a part of the essay that we have here. So, and he says, that as mentioned, that there is a section which is like from my own apartment. So, if we actually analyze this and unpack this, he says we see there is reportage and there is a reference to each time, in the section on gallantry and pleasure, there is a reference to a play that is being performed. There are so many, plays that feature in the Tatler that we understand that the Tatler is creating news and information of a different kind. So, for example, if I were to just share, this is from the April 14 issue, and this is from Will's Coffee House, which is 1709. So it reads like this: This evening, the comedy called The Country Wife was acted in Drury Lane for the benefit of Mrs. Bignell. The part which gives name to the play was performed by herself. Through the whole action, she made a very pretty figure and exactly entered into the nature of the part. Her husband in the drama is represented to be one of those debauchees who run through the vices of the town and believe when they think fit they can marry and settle off their ease. So, this, if we first and foremost look at it, this is kept under the section that is, the Will's Coffee House. And we see that there is a reference to a play that is performed, but at the same time, it is witty in the sense that it also tells us, it's satirizing the husband in the drama represented to be a debauchee who believes that, when they can, when fit, they can marry and settle off their ease. So this is the tone that the Tatler has, which is very, that the Tatler had, and this is very different from, as we know, the tone of the Spectator. So,
what was the tone of the Spectator? If you could.
Yes. So, if I were to I'm to really speaking quote from the Spectator, the formation of Sir Roger de Coverley or Sir Andrew Freeport. So, there are characters that are, for example, in the Spectator, he begins by saying that the first of our society is a gentleman of Worcestershire of ancient descent, a baronet, his name Sir Roger de Coverley. So this tone, it's not, it's creating characters, it's creating a kind of social interaction within the Spectator, whereas in the Tatler, if it begins from news and it's only in its later issues that it arrives at this. So to carry this further, and there's a lineage that is given to Sir Roger de Coverley now, that his great grandfather was inventor of that famous country dance, which is called after him. And all know that shire and very well acquainted with the parts and merits of Sir Roger. If you look at another character, so this is Sir Andrew Freeport, a merchant of great eminence in the city of London, a person of indefatigable industry, strong reason, great experience. So by this time, there is a certain recognition of the middle class characters that's happening in the Spectator, which runs from 1711 to 1712. And we have the Tatler running from 1709 to about 1711. So what do you think about the very different tones that are there in these two
I think you have explained it, at least suggested very clearly, the connection between these two conventions or traditions, because initially the person would like to understand, know, breathe in a culture, breathe in an atmosphere, and then suddenly one realizes that one should also think of the people who are moving around. So the first, the Tatler would not talk about the people as such, individuals as such, mental makeup and personality as such, but only about the manners, as you say. But then the imagination also wanders outside this atmosphere, and catches people who are participating in this. And in fact, that takes us then that very soon one would find that the market will take over. The merchants will come forward, they will start dominating society, they will start in fact dictating terms to the powerful in society, and they will also be part of the framing of culture, framing of policies. And I believe that, and I was struck also by the other statement that you made, that whatever is there in life is a subject for the essay.
Yes.
So if that is the case, then the entirety of the society is sought to be captured by the essay. And I believe that if all this rigmarole, if all this collection of details is to be borne by the essay, then essay is a democratic form.
Yes.
It also binds the nation into the poor and the rich in the cities, of course, together through that kind of thread of morality, thread of norms, etc.
So it's interesting that you say this, because then the English essay is also response to the times. where it is also responding to these new characters who have appeared. Not Sir Roger de Coverley's alone, but also the Andrew Freeports of the time. So it's a response in a sense to that. And there's a consciousness of the word history. So for instance, the very first issue of the Tatler, the 11th April one, begins by talking about this man. His history is that on the 9th of September 1705, being in his 120th year, he was washing his teeth at a tavern window in Pall Mall when a fine equipage passed by, and in it a young lady. So here is this man who's not presented in any glorified manner. I mean, he was washing his teeth at a tavern window, and that's where he sees this beautiful lady, and he then of course spends all his time trying to find out who this lady was. So and
the attention is diverted from the general manners to a person, to a lady,
yes,
to a person who is cleaning his teeth, and suddenly we start sharing a kind of anecdote, a kind of happening, a kind of narrative, and it's I think from Steele to Edison, it's a journey from the comment to the narrative. So
yes,
the narration is there, short stories coming,
yes,
and this short story might expand later on into a novel. Yes,
so
yes.
it's quite funny. So he says that away goes the coach, and the young gentleman pulled off his nightcap, and instead of rubbing his gums as he ought to do out of the window till about 4 o'clock, he sits him down and spoke not a word till 12 at night, after which he began to inquire if anybody knew the lady. So I mean, this is the trend that we see in the Tatler.
The Tatler doesn't focus on one particular thing, but you can see a connection emerging, as descriptions appear, in Tatler, and I think that justifies the very word Tatler also, because Tatler doesn't know what to say, and yet one has to talk and talk.
So and there is a separate periodical that starts at that time, which is called the Female Tatler.
Oh.
But so here is from the St. James Coffee House, 15th April, that letters from Turin of the 3rd instant inform us that His Royal Highness employs all his address in alarming the enemy, perplexing their speculations, and so on. So there is a lot of information that is being given, which is the current information at that time. So facts are very clearly stated. And this we see how Steele's experience in writing the periodical is that of somebody who's handling the newspaper. So from the newspaper to the periodical, which carries the English essay. So the essays as we understand in the Spectator are something that gradually develop. Then in the section he calls From My Own Apartment. So it's almost as if there is something that he just wants to say. So he says, therefore I hope the reader will forgive me that I desire he would go to the play called The Stratagem this evening, which is to be acted for the benefit of my near kinsman, Mr. John Bickerstaff. So here what we have is a direct address to the reader. So and this really speaking kind of tells us that the Tatler carries everything from information about culture to what is happening in the government, to honing the taste of the people who are consumers, who are reading this particular periodical. So Richard Steele's one of the critics says something very interesting and worth noting is that in essay number 124, which was written in 1710, there is what is depicted is, Amy Witherby says that there is a feverish excitement at that time about the state lottery of the year, and a public with an overinflated sense of confidence in its financial future. So here what you have in issue 124 is what Witherby says is a commentary on Parliament's latest effort to raise funds against future revenue. And Steele's essay then participates what Witherby calls in a period of financial transition in Britain during the late 17th and early 18th centuries, in which the state and its inhabitants sought to draw substantial economic value from the future in the form of long-term loans. So this is where the Tatler completely expands in a sense to, it's more nebulous. Whereas, as you rightly pointed out, that with the Spectator, we are arriving more at the kind of narrative form, so to say. And to carry this further, so how Isaac Bickerstaff then, with the B says, becomes a kind of dilettante mathematician when he writes about the state's war debt. So there are debates on how to fund England's war efforts abroad. And the 1710 essay on the lottery depicted Bickerstaff as caught up in a crowd forming near the bank to buy tickets. So, and after, of course, he reflects on the creativity of the state that has turned, to quote Witherby, wartime taxation into a public diversion. And Bickerstaff sells, he says, he sells off 2 globes and a telescope to purchase a lottery ticket. Now, selling off 2 globes and a telescope is obviously very, very, it resonates completely with the whole concept of war. And so he says that I find by my calculations it is but 150,000 to 1 against my being worth £1,000 per annum for 32 years. So this is, really speaking, the strength and the tone of the Tatler. So here again, if
I would like to consider the emergence of the form. One form that the way essay begins, the way essay expands, the way essay concludes, and this is the kind of thing that is generally there in the other literary forms also. In the essay, you find that there is a kind of description, then there is a kind of comment. After that, the description and comment, you have an actual human figure emerging. So one can see, that the essay form is, of course, evolving towards something that is commonplace, something that is contemporary, something that is political, ideological, and that one day, maybe 1750, 1760, you also will have essays, the novels, which will talk about the not just the manners, but also the inner world of characters.
Yes.
So they are actually closing in on the mental processes through manners, through flattery, through all those things, and the inner world of you can call it psychological also, like Richardson would very closely follow these people.
Yes.
So you have Fielding on one side who will talk about the comment, and you have Richardson who will talk about the goings on in the mind of a woman through letters. So I say that the essay, English essay, is very closely woven into another literary form, which is the novel, and that essay then will enter the novel and will in fact make it grow further and prosper.
So it's interesting that you say this, you brought in both Richardson and Fielding, and if we actually look especially at the Tatler, I think the connections are quite clear. So one chooses the epistolary form, and Fielding, who writes the novel, calls it the comic epic poem in prose, but also each chapter carries a heading. So it's almost something, I think, that actually comes, really speaking, from the English essay. And another aspect that we cannot discount in the English essay is that of determining and shaping the cultural sensibility. For example, in one of the issues, he compares Milton and Dryden and their depiction of Adam and Eve. So it's very fascinating, where Steele says that all Milton's thoughts are wonderfully just and natural, and in which Adam makes of himself in the 8th book of Paradise Lost. But there is none of them finer than that contained in the following lines, and he quotes the lines. There are a lot of long quotations also that form literary quotations that form a part of the Tatler. At the same time, he says something very interesting about Dryden and Dryden's depiction. He says, but now I can't forgive this odious thing, this Dryden, who in his state of innocence, he says, has given my great-grandmother Eve the same apprehension of annihilation on a very different occasion as Adam pronounces it of himself. So this is really speaking, the kind of wit that we are seeing at work, where of course we don't read everything at face value, but it in a sense prompts the readers to get into a discussion. Like we are already talking about 2 different depictions in a sense of, Adam and Eve. So determining the literary sensibility of the people, and we must note that whether it is the English novel, or the period after that, the English essay is actually giving attributes to the rising middle class, a class that's nebulous is in formation. It's giving these attributes of truth, of virtue, of innocence. The story, for instance, and there's of course several plays like The Old Bachelor and the others that are discussed. But there are specific instances that address the women. So there is a issue that discusses a woman called Pastorella, who always wants to overhear. She's always eavesdropping, wants to listen to what other people are saying. And her aunt acts very smart, Parisatis, says that, only if a woman is virtuous. So she's has multiple suitors. So when she overhears what her aunt has to say, she suddenly becomes, as Steele says, Pastorella immediately converts to being a fine and virtuous woman. So, of course, everything is also a kind of tongue-in-cheek. So, I think with the Tatler, we see the transitions from news to a kind of narrative that we see much late in the later issues of the Tatler and, of course, in the Spectator, being done by the same person. And, of course, how the essay itself determines the middle-class sensibility and gives rise, of course, closely associated to the rise of the novel.
So, how do you conclude your discussion? You have covered such a vast area of the 18th century life. So, vis-a-vis that, what is the role of the essay, generally speaking?
Generally speaking, for me, I think apart from the transitions that are there in the work of the writers themselves, but I think it's shaping of a certain cultural, literary, and almost like a political sensibility of the people.
And it's entirely new.
It's entirely
not there in the 17th
It's not
century.
there in the 17th century. So this shaping of the sensibility of a new class of people, along with the gentry, the nobility that will also have access to these things.
So the essay is rooted in the 18th century
Yes.
culture and life.
Yes.
So friends, it has been a very fascinating discussion with Professor Payal Nagpal regarding the rise of the essay in the 18th century and the chronology that she has established in a slightly different fashion, bringing Tatler into the picture as the forerunner. Of course, there are other things also that she referred to, but finally, Tatler, later on, turns the direction of Spectator, and after that, it's a long history. So I think it's very educative to understand with the help of Professor Payal Nagpal the rise, the evolution, the development of the English essay in the 18th century. Thank you.